Well, howdy, y'all. It's Florida Cracker Steve here with another video for you. Now, today's lesson is going to be on the Florida highwaymen artist. Now, these artists are my absolute favorite. I have always loved their work. Why? Well, as you can see, this is an example of a highwayman art piece. It's Florida landscape. Now, you know I love nature, and a Florida Cracker lives in nature. They're all about nature. So, of course, I absolutely love these kinds of paintings. Now, what's even better than the painting is the story behind the highwayman artist. Now, let me tell you a little bit about their history so you can appreciate these art pieces a little bit more. So, the highwaymen artists are made up of 26 African American artists. And they started their paintings in the mid-50s and went through and painted all through the 80s. So for a few decades, they painted these Florida landscape pieces. And in all, probably around 200,000 paintings were created by these 26 African American artists from the mid-1950s throughout the 1980s. Now, what makes these paintings unique is the history behind it. They are beautiful for sure. But what's interesting was that these artists became very well known. It wasn't until much later that people began to recognize their art as historically important. And why was that? Well, you have to understand, in the 50s and 60s, there was this thing called the Civil Rights Movement. All right? There were a lot of problems going on in the United States during that time. And racial equality was not quite there yet, as you know. And we learned a little bit about that in the Vietnam War history class. There was a lot of segregation going on. So there was limited opportunities for African American, and especially the artists. You see, most African Americans back then, they had limited job opportunities. So what began to happen was that there were a few African American artists that began to become a little bit more known. And things began to change in history during that time. One of the most important landmark Supreme Court cases was Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Now, in that Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was illegal. It was unconstitutional. So they ended segregation and began integration. And of course, it took a while for towns and states to enforce that constitutional, to enforce that Supreme Court change. But these artists, they created change through their art. And how wonderful that is. And there was one man, there were a couple of individuals, the original highwayman artists, that really made a difference in this movement. The original founder of the highwayman artist was a guy by the name of Harold Newton. Now, this is an original Harold Newton highwayman art piece. And Harold Newton, he was a self-taught artist. He was brilliant. And he painted a lot of religious type pieces early on. And then he met a man by the name of A.E. Bacchus. Now, A.E. Bacchus, he was well-known artist at that time. And he was a white artist. So he had a gallery. He had shows. He was famous. He went all over the place. And so A.E. Bacchus met Harold Newton and noticed instantly his talent of art. And by the way, A.E. Bacchus did not care what color Mr. Newton was, because he valued people not through their skin color, but by their character and by the creativity and the work of this artist. So A.E. Bacchus took Mr. Newton under his wing and began to mentor him and began to show him some things. And as a result, A.E. Bacchus introduced Mr. Newton to landscape artwork, because A.E. Bacchus was one of the most famous landscape artists at the time. So Harold Newton sat down with A.E. Bacchus and learned a lot of things about landscape art. And as a result, that allowed Mr. Newton to become more exposed. And because of the segregation that still existed in the state of Florida, and let me tell you, there were, like for example, this scene here, that's a picture of Daytona Beach, near Daytona. This is actually St. Augustine, and this is a segregated beach during that time. And this was in the late 50s. And yeah, there was a separate beach for white people and black people. There were separate movie theaters, schools, water fountains. You know that. You understand that. And so what began to happen was that Harold Newton, the original founder, teamed up with a couple of other artists. One being Alfred Hare was another individual who was very talented. And because of the segregation, they couldn't get into these art shows. And so what they did was they decided, you know what, I'm going to paint some paintings, and then I'm going to load them in my car and take them on the highways and byways and go into restaurants and banks and offices, and we're going to sell them. And that's exactly what they did. They didn't need no art gallery. They didn't need no fancy studio. They just painted their paintings, and they loaded them up in the cars, in the trunks of their cars, and they went to different offices and banks, and they walked in. They said, hey, would you like to buy some paintings? I have some very nice paintings of Florida landscape, and I understand that you just opened up your office, and you might want to have some decoration for your walls. And let me show you what I have. And so they would bring out these paintings, and they would sell them for like $10 for some small ones, and $15, $20, $35 for the big ones. This one cost $35 back in the 60s. And let me give you a little story about this paintings. My daddy, he had an office, believe it or not. And even though we're a Florida Cracker family, there's been a few folk in my family that have gone on to do some other things besides being a Florida Cracker, besides being a farmer. Okay. So, anyways, my daddy had an office in downtown Bradenton, aka B-Town, also known as the Friendly City, because we're all a bunch of friendly people in Bradenton. Anyways, one day he got a knock on the door, and this was the year 1968. And so somebody's knocking on his door, and he opened it, and there was Harold Newton standing right there. And he had a little wagon with him. And in that wagon were a bunch of paintings. And so he asked my dad if he wanted to buy some paintings. And being the nature enthusiast that my daddy is, and he said absolutely. He loves Florida landscape just as much as I love Florida landscape. So he bought a few of these big ones, like this one, and a couple small ones. And so we own about 6 or 7 original Harold Newton Florida Highwaymen art pieces. And but what is great about the Highwaymen artist is that not only does it depict the beauty of Florida and real Florida, but it also depicts the story of how this helped to end racial segregation, how they were able to overcome those barriers through the power of art, and how people began to see their work, and they can't help but ask the question, wow, why are we making such a big fuss over skin color? Because everyone has value. This is beautiful. And so people begin to see African Americans as equals as a result. And it's the power of these art pieces through this movement from the Highwaymen artists that made a huge contribution in Florida's history during the Civil Rights Movement. And what's unique about these paintings? Well, there's a unique style to this kind of painting. not only is it Florida landscape, but there's some other features that I need to point out. First of all, they didn't have a lot of money, so they used cheap materials. One of the things that they used this white crown molding that you see around this painting. They used different materials that you would find in house construction. So they would use this white crown molding here as the frame instead of a regular art frame because it was a lot cheaper. And then on the back of this painting, they did their paintings on what's called Epsom board. Now that's a cheap material. Here, let me show you behind the painting here. Behind the scenes look here. You see that? That's Epsom board. That's that green backing behind the painting. And that was materials that they used to help build walls. And so they used all the materials that they could because things were expensive. So they made do with what they had. And so that's classic highwaymen art, original art, the old pieces. We're talking about the 60s and early 70s. This was a late 60s painting and original. So you're going to see these kinds of materials being used. And so Harold Newton, he was the original founder, and then Alfred Hare came along, and then there were about 24 others that eventually joined the group. And over the years, there has been a number of them that have passed away. Harold Newton passed away, and of course, when you pass away, the art becomes more valuable. And so there's still a few individuals that are still alive. Now, I have this book here. It's called The Highwaymen, Florida Highwaymen. And I've had the privilege of meeting a few of them. And every once in a while, they come around this area here and they do gallery shows. And these paintings have become very popular today. They're a lot more popular today than they were back in the day. And so everyone's looking for highwaymen art pieces all of a sudden. And so I've had the privilege of meeting some of these individuals, and I want to point out a few of them, if I may, and let you see some of these art pieces as well. But here is some art paintings by Alfred Harris and Harold Newton. Harold Newton's over here. Isn't that beautiful? He painted a lot of beach scenes. And my daddy's got about 3 that are beach scenes. Now, I like the beach, but I like swamps a lot better. You know what I mean. And then here is an Alfred Hare piece here, and just beautiful Florida landscape. That's what they're all about, folks. Florida landscape, the beauty. Check this one out. Doesn't that look familiar? Check that out. That's pretty cool. Now, they do some good palm trees. Oh, by the way, it takes them about 15 minutes to paint this. True story. Now, I have had the privilege of sitting down and watching highwaymen artists paint. And it is absolutely amazing how fast they are. And another characteristic of highwaymen art is that they painted those paintings so fast, it was like assembly line painting. And so they would paint those paintings so fast, and they would load them in the cars, and they'd start on another painting. They'd still be wet when they're put in the trunks. So you're going to find mistakes in the paintings if you look close. Now, if you get farther back, you can't tell. Kind of like here. But you're going to see some mistakes. In fact, on one of my daddy's paintings, he's got Harold Newton's thumbprint on the back of it because it was still wet. And he grabbed it and threw it in the trunk of the car. And so they would do these paintings really fast, and that's how skilled they are. But anyways, check this out. That is a beautiful, beautiful tree. That's a poinsettia tree. And they're very, very popular in South Florida. And just look at the colors. Look at the colors. Beautiful. Now, these are real colors that you will find in a Florida landscape. If you get out in nature much, I hope you're getting out in nature. Well, I hope you stay in house right now because of the pandemic and all. But, it's good to go out in your backyard once in a while, especially after a nice storm. You can see some pretty colors when the sun's setting and all kind of orange colors and purples and greens and oranges and yellows and red colors, and I got me an autograph right here by Robert Lewis right there. You see his autograph? That's that guy right there in the yellow shirt. I met that guy. That's the first highwayman artist that I met, and he did a painting, and I wanted to buy it so bad, but I didn't have any money. But he painted a scene from a place called Pena Vista Lodge, and I spent a lot of time there. I was like, I know that place, and that's what's wonderful about the highwayman artist, because every Florida native can look at these art pieces and say, yep, I know exactly where that is. Or you look at that painting and it'll help remind you of a story or experience you've had in Florida. And this is a picture of Mr. Harold Newton that my father met, the original founder of the Highwaymen. Here's another piece that he did. That's beautiful. And let's see here. Here's a couple more. Oh, look at this. Look at this beautiful color here. That's South Florida there, folks. That's South Florida. Now, there's one I want to show you here. This one right here. That's Mary Ann Carroll right there. She is the only female in the group of 26 highwaymen artists. One female. And so I met her. I got to meet her a couple of years ago. And so this is one of her paintings here. And she was taught by Mr. Harold Newton. Now, funny story. You'll get a kick out of this. I gave her my book. I said, can you please give me an autograph? She said, sure, but I need to change something in your book. I said, well, what do you got to change? So she took my book and she did some scribbling. Here, let me read it to you. It's kind of cool. She's kind of upset too, by the way. She said, it says, Mary Ann Carroll, the only woman highwayman, learned to paint from Harold Newton in the early 1960s after she observed him painting on Avenue Q in Fort Pierce, which is straight across the state of Florida. Fort Pierce is where they all live. That was the main area where the highwaymen resided, and they painted. Fort Pierce, Florida. She had previously drawn with pencils, but Newton taught her how to paint. This is what she changed. She was pretty upset. She said, the book says they dated for a while, and although the relationship did not last, her career as an artist did. And she wrote, check this out. She wrote, not true. NT, not true, not true. And then she signed her name, Mary Ann Carroll. Man, she was like, I got to change this because that did not happen. We didn't go on no date. He wanted to, but I said no. And it was pretty funny. But she was pretty upset about it. So anyways, that's pretty cool. Got to meet Mary Ann Carroll, and she changed my book. So got to meet Mr. Al Black here. I almost bought a painting just like that the other day. The highwaymen consider him the greatest salesman of the highwayman artist. In fact, he took me into this room. He saw me eyeing that painting. I shook his hand. I said, Mr. Black, I'm a big fan of yours. And so he took me over. He said, look at this painting here. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool. He's like, I got to show you something. So he took me in this room, and I was kind of nervous. He said, close the door and shut the lights off. I'm like, oh, no. I don't know about that. So I did. But I was ready. You know what I mean? I was ready to defend myself. But when he shut the lights off, that painting glowed. It was awesome. I've never seen a painting like that in my life. It was like that sunset came to life. That sunset right there came to life, and it was glowing. And of course, he was using that as a way to get me to buy that painting. And I was this close. I just didn't have money to buy it because buying a highwayman artist painting today is quite a bit of money. So, anyways, a lot of great, beautiful works of art from the highwayman artist, and you might find one of these at a garage sale. So keep your eyes peeled. All right. If you go to the governor's mansion, I've never been invited by the governor. That'd be kind of cool, but I doubt it. I'll ever get invited. But anyways, if you look in the governor's mansion, all of the governor's mansion, they have highwayman art pieces all over that mansion. It is celebrated in Florida today. It is considered the official state art of Florida is highwaymen artwork. And I met Mr. Isaac Knight as well. He gave me an autograph as well. Beautiful, beautiful works of art. And, you know, I'm sure you guys have been out and you've seen these beautiful scenes in Florida. And, you know, in this day and age, we're so technologically sophisticated that we're always looking at our phones and not looking up in the sky that much. You know, I hope this lesson encourages you to take a look outside more, spend more time in nature, or just sit down and enjoy the simple things in life, like a beautiful sunset, and how that could make your life so much better. It'll give you so much enjoyment in your life. And then reflect on the history of Florida is all connected with nature. And even events that we study called civil rights, and how the arts are connected with the civil rights movement in the state of Florida, and how the arts made such a powerful impact. Well, I hope you guys learned something today, and we miss y'all. And I gotta go. I'm getting a craving for some Cracker Barrel takeout, if you know what I mean. So anyways, I'll catch you all later. Have a great day. Highwaymen art, ladies and gentlemen.